we would describe ourselves as a church is that we are a missional church. You may not know what that word is. You can tell the word mission, and you tack the AL on the end, and it kind of makes it weird or churchy. Well, the branch is a missional church. So I asked Chris to talk to you for a second about what it means to be a missional church and maybe how that's distinct from or how it contrasts with some of the other ways that Christians in America go about church.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I mean, first, hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here. That is for certain, and I'll gush on you all towards the end a little bit more. But to this question, it's a really important one. And at the branch, we don't use the word missional because it is kind of churchy. So what we do is use a couple of other phrases. One of them is we talk a lot about the fact that we are sent people. We use that word sent, S-E-N-T. Because we see in the scriptures over and over that God is a God that sends. God sends Moses to the people of Israel. God sends Jonah to the city of Nineveh and Paul to the Gentiles, and on it goes. And then, of course, we see Jesus at the very, very end of his time on earth sending us. Right? Jesus, in the last words of his time on earth, says, go. And in Acts 1, he says, I'm sending you to Judea and Jerusalem and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Go and make disciples, Jesus says. You are sent. We are sent. And that, I think for us, when we hear that kind of language, at least at the branch, people start to automatically think about missionaries being sent halfway around the world, right? And that happens, yes, and we're glad when it does. But for most of us, you're not going to Kenya. Likely. God's likely not going to send you halfway around the world. Instead, what God is going to do, we believe, is send you to the person in the cubicle next to you. And God is going to send you to the person at the end of your street who needs comfort or care or help. And that is the kind of sentness that we talk about at the branch. You are sent, I am sent, and the church is sent to be a blessing. That's the other phrase we use a lot at the branch. Not missional, but we talk about how we are blessed to be a blessing. That God doesn't just bless us so that we can feel better about ourselves. God blesses us so that we can bless other people, right? And talking to Chris, we were kind of going through, he wanted to know what I was going to say today to make sure it was all okay, It's not true. I said, actually, I want you to hear what I'm going to say to make sure it helps. It's helpful. So we were talking about this, and I was just saying to him, I bet that to RiverTree, those words of being sent and blessed to be a blessing, those are going to make sense to you guys. You use, I saw up earlier on the screen, loving your neighbor and reaching out. You guys get it. But the truth of the matter is that is a really, really hard way to live, isn't it? I mean, individually in my own life, it's just a lot easier to take the blessings that God has for me and hang on to them. It's just easier. And that's not only true of myself, I think it's true of churches. It's just easier for churches to kind of take all that God has to give to us, which is an unimaginable amount of goodness and grace and love, and just kind of hang on to it. And I don't think that we wake up in the morning and go, oh, well, today I'm just going to hang on to everything that God has for me, and I am not going to share it because I want it for myself. I don't think we do that. But I think it just kind of happens very, very subtly over time. It's just kind of the way that we're wired. It's our flesh getting in there and holding on to more and more. And so for us at the branch, to give you just like a concrete example of how this actually gets lived out, we needed to buy a new soundboard not that long ago. And it was recommended to us that we spend about $5,000 because that's what we needed, we were told. It makes sense. There's nothing wrong with a $5,000 soundboard. But we just asked the question, is that purchase necessary? Is it in line with our values? Does it help us be a blessing more? And in the long run, what we ended up deciding was to buy a $600 soundboard that pumps out sound and does what soundboards do, but then also allowed us to have a whole bunch more money to free up to be a blessing with. And so, we've just found, at least for us, that we have to be very, very intentional, day in and day out. Keep this in front of us, that we're sent, and we're sent to be a blessing, and then make decisions accordingly as best we can.
Good. Along those lines is this issue, which seems on the screen or on paper to be simple, but it's not. How does a church like the Branch, with your priorities and your values, how do you define success? Because churches define it differently.
This has been an evolving, I think, thing for us. Right now, today, for us, success at the Branch comes down to this question: are we making disciples who make disciples? Jesus says, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, go to all nations, baptizing them, and make disciples, Jesus says. Make disciples. It seems to matter a whole lot to Jesus. Again, it's his final words to us. Go and make disciples. And we've been thinking a lot about that. I think the word disciple in the church is fairly familiar. But usually what happens in the church in North America today is that we talk about being a disciple very personally and for ourselves. So we say the church exists to help Chris DeBlaay be a disciple. And so, church, I want you to give me what I need to be a disciple, to grow in faith, to become like Christ. But if that's where it stops, we've missed the other half, we think, at the Branch. We think Jesus says, go and make disciples. Jesus says, I'm going to turn you into someone who's more like me so that you can go and help someone become more like me. Making disciples who make disciples. So that's what we're counting these days. We're trying to count how many people are becoming a disciple of Jesus and helping someone else become a disciple of Jesus. And we have ways to do that and ways to measure that. That's very different from how we maybe used to measure success, or how it's very tempting to measure success. The default way in the church today is to count ABC. Attendance A, building B, cash C. These are the ways that we usually count success and measure success in the church in North America today. And at the Branch, we pay attention to those things. I think they're worth paying attention to. If your attendance for 3 years is constantly doing this, you should probably take note of that and ask some really hard questions and honest questions about why that is, But A, B, and C, attendance, building, and cash, they're only numbers. They don't tell you the whole story. If we were to count the number of people here today, that would be an interesting number to note and maybe to compare to other Sundays over the whatever. But the number of people here today tells me nothing about what's happening in your heart. And are you growing in Christ-like character? And are you loving your enemies more? And are you embracing the outcast more often? Like, that number tells us nothing about that. And so we've tried to look at a different way to measure success while still paying attention to those other things. But that's what we're trying to do.
So along those lines, you know that what you're trying to do at the Branch is distinct, different, maybe even trying to correct some things about how we do church in North America. How do you help your people at the Branch, because you're about our size, how do you help them not look at other churches and play the comparison game? Or look at a church that's 10 times its size and not feel inferior?
We have this great pill that we just hand out every Sunday morning. And
is that
just
legal?
Came to me, actually.
Can we do that? Awesome.
Man. I mean, yeah, I'm sitting here right now saying to you, A, B, and C, attendance, building, cash, those things are not the way to measure success. And yet the reality of the situation is that that's the easiest way to measure success, and it's the way that we're programmed to measure success in North America. And so it is really hard for me, a pastor, to not drive down the road on the way to my church on Sunday morning and look at XYZ church that is 10 times my size, or just built that 1,500-seat sanctuary, or has that killer program that made news, in the paper or whatever, and not feel inferior. It's really hard. And so what we try to do a lot is talk about how this American way of thinking that bigger is always better, we try to talk a lot at the branch about how that just isn't true. Bigger isn't necessarily better, and smaller isn't necessarily better. We could sit up here for this whole morning and tell everyone stories about how big churches that everyone has looked up to, the kind of churches that throw conferences for other churches to come to and learn from, those kinds of churches have made, sometimes, terrible mistakes and been incredibly dysfunctional and caused lots of harm to its people. But we also could tell lots of stories about small churches that have done the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And so the point, I think, isn't whether you're big or you're small as a church. The question is, are we being obedient to who God has called us to be? And I'm reminded of what Jesus says to Peter. He says, "On you, Peter, I will build the church." Paul says in another place, we might scatter the seed, but God causes it to grow. God is the one, I think, who decides and who causes churches to grow in their different ways and at different rates and all those sorts of things. That isn't our primary concern. Our primary concern is whether or not we're being faithful to becoming the kind of church that we feel God is calling us to be. So the less we focus on size, the more we focus on obedience, I think the better.
Good. So the question I was going to ask you right now, I'm going to move till after the next one, okay? Because I think it fits better. Okay. So here's the last one. You're exactly right. Small and big can be done well or poorly. So why don't you help us see through your eyes some of the distinctive advantages and disadvantages of being churches the size of RiverTree or the branch?
Let's start with some of maybe the challenges of being smaller. One challenge we've started to talk about, I think it's worth saying again though. When you're a church this size or a church the size of the branch, it is really easy to devote a lot of your energy to looking over your shoulder. Right? You spend a lot of time looking around and going, what are they doing? And wow, did you catch that? And we should really do those things. And so much of your energy actually gets spent not doing anything but looking around. I think that's a really big challenge that should be acknowledged among churches our size. I think another challenge is that, frankly, we don't have the kinds of resources that big churches have, right? One of the advantages of big church is that they've got more people, and therefore just by the percentages, they have more talent or more people from different skill sets, and they have probably more money available to them, and all these things are true. So we should just acknowledge the fact that we don't have the same amounts of resources as a big church, and we should be okay with that. So that when someone comes to us and says, hey, gosh, wow, my kid just went to the youth ministry down the road, and they have like pool tables and a cafe and an indoor water park. Like, when are we gonna, when are we gonna put that up? We should have something like that too. I think churches like us should be able to say, oh, hold on. Again, what matters most here? It's being obedient to the calling that we feel God has given to us, and not comparing ourselves or trying to be like someone else. Because that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be the kinds of churches that God has called us to be. So I think those are some of the challenges. Mm-hmm. Some of the advantages maybe, or some of the strengths of being a church this size. I think there are many. I'll just name two of them. One, I think it's just easier to belong in a place of this size. It's not a guarantee. You could still come here, or you could come to the branch on Sunday morning, pop in and out on most weeks, and never connect. But I think it's a lot easier to connect relationally. I think it's a lot easier in a church this size to contribute. If you've ever been to a big church, you're not going to walk up to the pastor on Sunday morning, probably because it's going to be hard to talk to the pastor, number
Right,
one.
right.
I mean, honestly.
That's right.
And they do that because they have to. You're not going to walk up to the pastor and go, you know, God this week said something to me, and I'm really feeling called to do this. It's just not going to happen. At a church like the Branch, we don't do anything until someone comes to us and says that. Like, we are waiting for people and need people to come and say, hey, God has been saying this to me, and and then it leads us down a particular ministry path. So I think there's opportunity to belong and connect and be known. It just happens more easily in a group this size. The other thing I would say, this may seem smaller or kind of like a small deal. I think it's actually a huge deal, is that churches this size can be more agile. Think of anybody been watching football lately? You know, you've got a 350-pound lineman. Yeah, thanks, Russ. You know, right? Like, I've been watching a lot of it. Big football players, man, they have a lot of mass. And if you can get them moving in the right direction, look out. And that's I think true of big churches. A lot of mass, a lot of resources. If you can get everyone moving in the same direction, look out. You're going to do some incredible good. But 350-pound linemen take a long time to get started and get moving, and they cannot change direction quickly. I think of a church this size more like a running back, if I'm going to stick with the football analogy. Apology to all of you who hate football. I'll be done in a moment. You know, running backs can pack a punch, right? They can make a difference, but they also can turn on a dime. We live in a world that is changing faster than it has ever changed. It is constantly, with every generation, every half generation, we're seeing these huge shifts take place in our culture. And the church tends to be way behind culture and trying to always play catch up when I think we're supposed to be out front leading. And so I think churches this size are poised to be on the forefront of the change and to help usher in the good of God in the midst of that cultural shift. So there you go.
To help you connect the dots, remember what I told you about the Burmese refugees that are coming? Yeah, we couldn't do that if we were 5 times our size. We got 2 weeks to pull this off.
Right.
Our size, our agility is to our advantage in this case.
Yep.
So in talking to Chris about this Sunday, we kind of got off on a tangent, which happens, about the facilities question that the branch is facing. For the sake of history, the branch's situation is different than ours in that they meet at a church facility of an older congregation that is in the process of closing, so they were gifted the building over at 28th and Eastern. But recently they have had some discussions based on their values and their goals and their priorities as a church about what exactly they need to do with this great gift that God's given them. And I wanted you to hear Chris talk about how they're having this conversation.
Yeah, you know, when you're given a building, there's kind of 2 reactions. One is, oh my gosh, we've been given a building. There's like high-fiving going on, you know, and it's like, yeah. And then you're like, but we've been given a building. Yeah, you know, I mean, it's a great gift. It's also a great responsibility. And in our particular case, the building that we've been given needs a very significant amount of repair done to it. There's a big price tag attached. And so, yeah, we've been wrestling with what do we do? You know, what do we do with this space that we've been given? And there have been a couple of things that have kind of become clear to us. Just so you know, we haven't made a decision yet. I think we're getting close, but we haven't quite made a decision yet about what we're going to do. But one thing that has become quite clear to us is that owning a building requires a great deal, not of just money, but of energy and time and focus and thought. And we've been building owners for 2 years now, and I have been blown away at how much time it takes for our leadership team. You know, our leadership team meetings, a good chunk of them now for 2 years have been spent on this building. In fact, so much time has been spent that we've spent a dreadfully small amount of time talking about ministry and mission. And again, there's the money thing, of what it costs to maintain a building, and then in our case, what it costs to repair it. Mm-hmm. And so there's just a really significant cost. We've just tried to acknowledge that fact for us. And the other thing that's become clear is that for a church like the Branch, it makes no sense for us to own a building outright and be the only church in it. Remember that whole scent business I was talking about a while ago, this missional idea? For us, so much of our ministry happens outside of our four walls of a building, right? In homes and in coffee shops and in libraries and in workplaces and all this stuff. And so, we've been asking the question, is it good stewardship of our money, energy, time, thought, focus to devote a huge percentage of that to a building that we just don't use all that much, that a building that really isn't central to our identity and our mission? And the answer's been no. And so we're likely going to do something pretty crazy. We're likely going to give our building away to a church for whom it does make more sense to own a building. And then we're going to become renters again. And I got to tell you, when I've shared that news with some people, they're all churchy people. I kind of get a head scratch, like, huh? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you give a building away? Well, because just, again, for us, this isn't true for every church, but for us, it doesn't make sense to own a building outright and be the only ones in it. So what we're looking to do is, we're not looking to rent some commercial space. That doesn't really interest us a ton. We're looking to partner with another church and enter into a covenant relationship and share space together. And so we have a couple of options of what that might look like. But we're doing a pretty crazy thing. We're probably going to give away a building. So,
yeah, that's why I wanted you here, right? See how values and priorities and aims really change the way you address a concrete question that all churches have to address along the way.
Yep.
So I don't know about you, I'm exceedingly grateful to Chris for allowing us to tap into his expertise and his experience and the life and ministry of our sister church, the Branch. And one of the things I asked Chris if he'd like the chance to do today, since he has a long history with our church and also has a significant investment in our church. So I asked him if he'd like the chance to pray for us this morning, and he said no. So he will not be doing that right now. No, he said yes. So we'll finish our little interview by Chris praying for all of us.
Yeah, I'm honored to do it because this is my gush part on you guys. This place it has a place in my heart. This church has certainly changed quite a bit. I mean, I left here 7.5 years ago. A lot happens in 7.5 years, right? Sometimes more than other 7.5 year periods. You all know what I'm talking about. And yet, this community was central in shaping who I am. And even as we talked this last week, who RiverTree is becoming is shaping who I am. I mean, our conversations have been formative for me and encouraging for me, and I'm really excited about the direction that RiverTree is going, and it gives me joy and hope. So you all, whether I know you or not, you mean something to me, and I'm honored to be able to pray for you. So let me do that in a moment. God, I want to pray for two things. The first thing I want to pray for this community that I love and this community that, God, even more so, you love. I want to ask that there would be unity in this place among these people. Not always agreement. Unity doesn't always equal agreement. differing ideas and different perspectives can actually be a really wonderful thing. But at the end of the day, that there would be unity, a strong sense of cohesion at RiverTree Community Church. Give people humble hearts and open minds, God, to where you would be leading this body. And then help them step into that future together, united. The other thing I pray for, God, is courage. I pray for courage for every individual here as they go out of these doors and step into their Monday through Friday week and will have opportunities to be your hands and feet wherever they go. In those moments, God, tomorrow, would you give the people of RiverTree courage to be your presence, to be your love, your hope, your compassion, your joy, wherever they go? And would you help this body to be courageous? Even if, God, you call them in a direction or to do something that maybe is hard to get their head around or is unconventional, or who knows, God, how you may lead. In whatever direction it is, give them courage to step out and trust you, to follow you, to give their whole selves to you. For unity and courage, God, I pray, and trust that you will give each of these things to the people and to the body of RiverTree Church. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Would you thank Chris for coming and sharing with us this morning?